My parents skipped my master graduation for a luxury resort trip with my sister. I invited my best friend parents instead. A few hours later, the film studio honored them on live television with a check for $500,000. By the time I walked off stage, my phone showed 82 missed calls. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with a toxic family to protect your peace. My name is Maya and I am 28 years old. I stood in the foyer of my parents' upscale Atlanta home clutching 4 VIP tickets to my film school graduation. My hands were practically shaking with excitement. After 3 grueling years of sleeping in editing bays and funding my documentary with maxed-out credit cards, I was finally getting my Master of Fine Arts degree. I had secured front-row seats for my family, anticipating the pride in their eyes. Instead, I walked into a tornado of designer luggage and resort wear. My mother, Helen, was aggressively stuffing a sequined cover up into a massive Louis Vuitton suitcase. My father, Marcus, was polishing his favorite golf clubs. Neither of them even looked up when the front door clicked shut behind me. "Mom," I said, holding the glossy embossed envelopes, "I have the VIP passes for tonight. The ceremony starts at 7, so we should probably leave by." Helen finally turned around, her face completely blank. "Oh, Maya, we are not going to your little graduation thing. I completely forgot to tell you." I froze. "You forgot? I have been reminding you about this date for 6 months. Do not use that tone with me," my mother snapped, zipping her suitcase with unnecessary force. "Brad surprised us this morning. He chartered a private jet to take the whole family to a luxury resort in Cabo. We leave in 2 hours. You can just catch an Uber to your school. It is only a ceremony anyway." My father did not even make eye contact. He just kept polishing his clubs, muttering something about how I needed to be more flexible and understand that a free trip to Mexico does not happen every day. My older sister Chloe glided down, clutching the arm of her white husband Brad. Chloe had always been the golden child, the one who married a wealthy finance guy, the one who brought status to my parents' country club social circle. I was just the scapegoat, the struggling artist who refused to get a real corporate job. Brad smirked as he saw me standing there with my tickets. He reached into his tailored slacks, pulled out his money clip, and carelessly tossed a crisp $100 bill onto the entryway console. "Take that for your Uber, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with that familiar condescension. "Good luck with your little amateur videos tonight. Chloe and I cannot miss this exclusive wine tasting in Cabo. My treat, of course. Honestly, Maya, you should be happy for us. Brad works so hard to treat this family. You could learn a thing or two from him instead of chasing pipe dreams with your camera. Mom and Dad need people who actually provide." I looked at the crumpled $100 bill on the table. I calmly walked over to the console, picked up the $100 bill, and shoved it right back into the front pocket of Brad's designer shirt. "Keep your spare change, Brad," I said, my voice dangerously soft but steady. "You might need it to tip the bellboy." Without another word, I turned my back on them and walked out the front door. The heavy mahogany slammed shut, cutting off my mother-offended gasp. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person who had ever truly supported my dreams. "Tara," I said when my best friend answered. "Are your parents busy tonight?" Within 20 minutes, I was standing on the sidewalk in front of Tara Childhood Home. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson came rushing out the front door, already dressed in their Sunday best. They had been the ones who bought me my first real camera when my own parents refused. They were the ones who packed me extra dinners during late-night editing sessions. They had nourished my spirit when my own blood starved it. I handed Mrs. Jackson the VIP tickets, and she pulled me into a hug so tight it healed pieces of my soul I did not know were broken. Just then, a massive, sleek black limousine turned the corner and glided to a stop right in front of us. A uniformed driver stepped out and opened the door. "Miss Maya," he said respectfully, "the studio sent me to escort you and your guests to the red carpet." Mr. Jackson's eyes went wide. "Maya, what kind of graduation is this?" I smiled, helping them into the plush leather interior. The limo pulled away, leaving my toxic family drama far behind. They had no idea that my little amateur video was a feature-length documentary exposing financial abuse that had just been acquired by a massive global streaming network. 2 hours later, I was standing backstage in the Grand Theater listening to the roar of a sold-out crowd. The lights were blinding and the energy was electric. My hands were sweating not from sorrow, but from pure adrenaline. The executive producer of the network stepped up beside me. He adjusted his headset and gave me a sharp nod. "The live stream is officially up," he whispered, leaning in close to my ear. "We are trending globally. The analytics team says we will hit 5 million viewers tonight easily." He patted my shoulder and smiled. "You look incredible, Maya. Now take a deep breath. Are you ready to walk out there and accept your $500,000 check on live television?" The heavy velvet curtains parted, and the roar of the crowd washed over me like a physical force. I stepped from the shadows into the blinding glare of the stage lights. The presenter, a renowned film director, smiled warmly, handing me the heavy crystal trophy. For the first time in 28 years, I felt completely seen, not as a disappointment, not as a scapegoat, but as a visionary. The announcer voice boomed across the auditorium, reaching 5 million screens globally. The National Best Picture award goes to Blood and Ledger's, a masterclass in exposing the hidden financial abuse within toxic family dynamics. I gripped the cold glass of the award. The network executives seated in the front row stood up, clapping enthusiastically. They had handed me a global distribution deal, changing my life forever, but the real prize was waiting on a silver tray, held by an usher. It was a check for $500,000. The applause slowly faded into a hush of anticipation. Everyone expected the standard acceptance speech. I leaned into the microphone. The teleprompter displayed generic talking points, but I ignored them entirely. Tonight I wrote my own script. "People always say you owe your success to the family that raised you." I began, my voice ringing clear and steady through the massive sound system. "They say blood is thicker than water, and you should honor your mother and father because they sacrificed everything for your dreams." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I knew exactly who was watching: the entire congregation at First Fellowship Church, the gossip circle at the country club, and every neighbor who had ever heard my mother brag about her golden child while dismissing my existence. "Well," I continued, gripping the edges of the podium, "my biological parents sacrificed absolutely nothing for this moment. In fact, just hours ago, they skipped this very ceremony to hop on a private jet to Cabo, leaving me standing in the hallway with a $100 bill and a dismissive wave." The audience gasped. A collective shock rippled through the theater. I did not falter. Instead, I turned toward the front row where Mr. and Mrs. Jackson sat, their eyes wide with disbelief and overwhelming pride. "But family is not about shared DNA," I said, pointing directly at them. "Family is about who stays when everyone else leaves. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, please come up here." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause as the Jacksons made their way up the stairs. Mrs. Jackson wiped away tears with a tissue, and Mr. Jackson held her hand, his chest puffed out with pride. I took the massive novelty check from the usher and placed it directly into their hands. I turned back to the camera, making sure my face filled the frame for millions watching at home. "I am not thanking Helen and Marcus tonight," I declared, my voice echoing with finality. "I am thanking these two beautiful souls. These are my real parents. The ones who never abandoned me for a luxury resort trip. The ones who fed me, believed in me, and bought my first camera when my own blood told me I was worthless. This $500,000 is for you." The theater exploded into a standing ovation. People were on their feet, cheering and shouting in support. I embraced the Jacksons, pulling them close as the camera captured the ultimate validation of my entire life. I had not just won an award, I had reclaimed my narrative and shattered the pristine facade my parents had spent decades building. As the stage manager escorted us back toward the wings, the digital fallout was already beginning. The executive producer met me at the curtain line, holding up his tablet with absolute astonishment. "Maya," he said, breathless, "you just broke the internet." He turned the screen toward me. Black Twitter had ignited like a wildfire. The clip of my speech had been shared thousands of times within minutes. The comments were pouring in faster than the screen could refresh. Everyone recognized the toxic family dynamics I had just called out. Called out the church community, the very people my parents spent years trying to impress were having a field day. Deacons, choir members, and neighborhood aunties were relentlessly tagging Helen and Marcus. They flooded the comment sections with merciless mockery. Look at Helen pretending to be a saint every Sunday while tossing her own daughter aside for a margarita, one user wrote, another added. Marcus really left a $500,000 check on the table for a cheap vacation. The hashtags were brutal and glorious. The entire social hierarchy my parents worshipped was currently tearing them to shreds. They were publicly humiliated, stripped of their fake prestige in front of the entire world. I thanked the producer and guided the Jacksons to the VIP lounge to celebrate, but I needed a moment to breathe. I stepped into my private dressing room and closed the door, letting the quiet wash over me. The adrenaline was still pumping through my veins. I walked over to the vanity and picked up my phone, which had been left on silent. The screen was glowing with an endless stream of notifications. I swiped up to unlock it, and a notification banner immediately caught my eye. I had exactly 82 missed calls. They were all from Helen, Marcus, and my sister Chloe. The panic in their digital footprint was palpable. It was the text message at the top of the screen that made me stop breathing for a second. It was not a frantic apology from my mother or a demand for an explanation from my father. It was a message from my arrogant white brother-in-law, Brad. I tapped the message, letting the words burn into my memory. What the hell did you just do on TV? My credit card in Cabo just got locked. A slow smile spread across my face. The dominoes were finally starting to fall. A slow smile spread across my face. Before I could process Brad's text message, my phone erupted into a loud ringtone. The caller ID flashed with my mother name. I let it ring 3 times before tapping the answer button. Her voice blasted through the speaker instantly. Maya, what kind of demonic stunt are you pulling on television? My mother shrieked. You have humiliated us. You smeared ashes on this family face. Every deacon at First Fellowship Church texted me. Pastor Williams left a voicemail asking if we have a family crisis. You need to get back on that stage right now and tell them it was a prank. Fix this immediately. I leaned back against the plush velvet sofa and took a slow sip of bottled water. I am not fixing anything, Mom. I said, my voice dangerously calm. Every word I said out there was the absolute truth. You skipped my graduation for a luxury vacation you thought Brad was paying for. Now you get to deal with the public fallout of your own choices. I could hear chaotic background noise filtering through the phone line. It did not sound like the serene oceanfront ambiance of a 5-star Cabo San Lucas resort. Instead, I heard the unmistakable sounds of panic. Someone was speaking rapid, aggressive Spanish. A man who sounded suspiciously like a resort manager was shouting about federal authorities. Above all that commotion, I could hear my golden sister Chloe sobbing uncontrollably. What is going on in the background, Mom? I asked, feigning innocent curiosity. Why is Chloe crying on her luxury vacation? Helen's breath hitched. The haughty, demanding tone she used a minute ago suddenly faltered. There is a terrible misunderstanding with the resort billing, she stammered defensively. Brad Bank put a temporary fraud freeze on his accounts because we are traveling internationally. The staff here is being incredibly rude and unreasonable. They are threatening to call the local police over a simple banking error. Put Brad on the phone, I commanded. Helen hesitated. He is busy trying to sort out this mess with the concierge. I said, put Brad on the phone right now or I will hang up and block your number. A few seconds of rustling followed before Brad's voice came through the receiver. He sounded nothing like the arrogant, wealthy savior who had tossed a $100 bill at me earlier today. He sounded like a cornered rat. Maya, he hyperventilated. You have to wire me some money right now. I do not know what happened. They declined all my cards. The front desk manager is holding our passports until the bill is settled. They are talking about calling the Mexican Federal Police. I laughed, a sharp, cold sound that echoed in the quiet dressing room. There is no fraud freeze on your accounts, Brad. I know exactly what is happening. You do not have any money. You never did. You have been parading around Atlanta acting like a Wall Street titan while drowning in debt. Brad went dead silent. The heavy breathing stopped. What are you talking about? He choked out. I pulled up a digital file on my tablet. I am a documentary filmmaker, Brad. Investigating financial abuse is literally what just won me a national award and $500,000. Did you really think I would not run a background check on the man who moved into my parents' house and started acting like he owned the place? I know about the credit cards. I know you secretly opened a high-limit premium credit card under my father's name and social security number. You have been using Marcus' excellent credit score to fund your fake millionaire lifestyle. That private jet, that luxury villa, those expensive wine tastings, it is all being charged to an account in my father's name. You have completely maxed out his credit and burned through his retirement savings to show off. You stole from Marcus to impress Marcus and Chloe. And now the credit limit is blown, and the card is declining in a foreign country. You are a fraud. A pathetic broke fraud. I could hear Brad drop the phone. The clatter was followed by Chloe screaming at him, demanding to know if what I just said was true. The background noise escalated into absolute chaos. Helen snatched the phone back up. Her breathing was ragged. All the church prestige, all the country club arrogance had completely evaporated. She was stripped down to raw terror. Maya, she sobbed, her voice dropping to a desperate, pathetic whisper. Please, you have to save the family. We are in a foreign country. The resort security has locked the doors. They are demanding $30,000 immediately for the private jet charter and the villa deposit. If we do not pay, they are handing us over to the local police. Brad will go to a Mexican jail. Your father will go to jail. I will go to jail. Please, Maya. I know you just won $500,000. You have plenty of money now. Be a good daughter. Save us. We are your blood. I stood up and walked over to the mirror, looking at my own reflection. I saw a successful, independent black woman who had finally broken the chains of generational guilt. I saw a woman who refused to pay the toxic tax of saving people who would gladly watch her drown. I am sorry, Mom. I said, my voice lacking any trace of sympathy. I cannot help you. Helen gasped. Maya, you cannot leave us here. We have no money and no way to get to the airport. How are we supposed to get out of this resort? I smiled, remembering the exact words they used when they left me standing in the hallway. Try calling an Uber, Mom, I said. I pressed the end call button and tossed the phone onto the vanity, letting the silence of victory wrap around me. The silence in my dressing room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I did not waste another second thinking about the panic unfolding thousands of miles away. Instead, I packed up my things and prepared for my new reality. The next 48 hours moved with lightning speed. While I was busy signing distribution contracts and popping champagne with the Jacksons, the Grapevine back in Atlanta was working overtime. Tara kept me updated on every humiliating detail of my family's spectacular downfall. The resort management did not bluff. When Brad could not produce a working credit card security, escorted all four of them off the property in the middle of the night. They were dumped on the curb with their designer luggage and forced to beg for help. Helen actually swallowed her massive pride and called Sister Beatrice, the biggest gossip in First Fellowship Church, to wire them enough money for cheap economy plane tickets. By the time their budget flight landed back in Georgia, their humiliation was complete. They arrived in the middle of the afternoon wearing the same wrinkled resort wear they had been parading around in 2 days prior. The entire neighborhood had seen the viral video of my acceptance speech. As Helen, Marcus, Chloe and Brad dragged their heavy suitcases up the driveway, curtain blinds twitched across the street. Neighbors who used to wave and compliment Helen's pristine garden now stood on their porches, openly staring with undisguised disdain. The fake empire of wealth and status they had built was entirely reduced to ash. I did not stick around to witness their walk of shame personally. I had already sent a professional moving company to my parents' house hours before their flight landed. The movers packed up every single item from my cramped, neglected childhood bedroom. I left nothing behind but the bare walls and the lingering echo of their relentless criticism. My new residence was a massive penthouse in Buckhead, fully paid for by the streaming network as part of my new executive producer package. Stepping into that space for the first time felt like finally taking a full breath after drowning my entire life. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The marble floors gleamed and the expansive open-concept living area was bathed in natural light. It was a physical manifestation of my hard work and dedication. I had my own production office set up in a sleek commercial building downtown, complete with a reception area and a team of assistants. I was no longer the family punching bag, I was a powerhouse. A week into my new life. I was sitting at my custom glass desk reviewing the final cuts of my documentary when my desk phone buzzed. It was my receptionist. "Miss Maya," she said, her voice laced with hesitation. "Your sister and a gentleman are in the lobby. They are demanding to see you, and they brought someone who claims to be their legal counsel." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and smiled. I knew they would not go down without a fight. Desperation always breeds audacity. "Send them up," I instructed. I pressed a button under my desk that activated the security recording system. I was not about to let a single word of this interaction go undocumented. The heavy glass doors of my office swung open. Chloe marched in first, trying her best to project her usual arrogant aura, but the dark circles under her eyes gave her away. She was carrying a cheap knockoff handbag, a far cry from the authentic luxury items Brad used to buy her with my father's stolen money. Brad trailed behind her, looking pale and jittery. His tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, as if the stress of his impending financial ruin had physically shrunk him. Walking between them was a sleazy-looking man in a wrinkled polyester suit, carrying a battered briefcase. He looked like the kind of lawyer who advertised his services on park benches and late-night local television. "Nice place, Maya," Chloe sneered, looking around the immaculate office with undisguised envy. "I see you are really leaning into this whole Hollywood director fantasy." I kept my expression entirely neutral, resting my hands on the cool glass of my desk. "What do you want, Chloe? I am a very busy woman, and I do not have time for unannounced visitors." Brad stepped forward, aggressively invading my personal space. He slammed his hands down hard on the surface of my desk, making my coffee mug rattle. "You owe me, Maya," he growled, his face turning an ugly shade of crimson. "We are not here to play games. We are here to collect what rightfully belongs to us." I raised an eyebrow, looking from Brad to the cheap lawyer who was currently wiping sweat from his forehead. "Belong to you?" I asked, my tone dangerously even. "I think you are severely confused, Brad. The only thing that belongs to you right now is a mountain of credit card debt and a potential federal indictment for identity theft." The lawyer cleared his throat and opened his briefcase, pulling out a hastily typed document. "Actually, Miss, my client has a legitimate legal claim to your recent financial windfall. We are prepared to file a civil suit if our demands are not met immediately." I folded my arms across my chest. "Enlighten me," I challenged them. Brad leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and pure desperation. "5 years ago, I bought you a $200 camera tripod for your birthday," he snarled. "You used that tripod to shoot the early footage for your little movie. According to the law, that makes me an initial investor in your production company. I demand 50% of your $500,000 prize money right now, or I will sue you for everything you have and shut this entire operation down." I stared at Brad as his pathetic threat hung in the air of my pristine office. He actually thought a $200 tripod from 5 years ago gave him equity in my life. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached across my custom glass desk and pressed the silver intercom button. "Send them in," I said. The heavy glass doors slid open immediately. 2 men in immaculate bespoke suits walked in. These were not strip mall attorneys. They were senior legal counsel for the global streaming network that had just handed me a massive distribution deal. They carried genuine leather briefcases and possessed the kind of quiet, ruthless confidence that cost $1,000 an hour. They stood on either side of my desk, looking down at Brad and his sweating bargain bin lawyer. "Gentlemen," I said, gesturing to the wrinkled document on my desk. "This man claims he is an initial investor in my production company because he gifted me a piece of camera equipment half a decade ago. He is demanding $250,000. My lead attorney, David, picked up the paper with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. He glanced at the typed words and let out a short, dry laugh. He then looked directly at Brad, cheap lawyer. "Is this a joke or a genuine legal threat?" he asked. Because if it is a threat, I will personally see to it that you are disbarred for frivolous litigation. A gift is legally classified as a completed transfer of property with no expectation of return. There is no signed operating agreement, no equity distribution contract, and no registered partnership. You have exactly zero legal standing. The cheap lawyer wiped his forehead again, his hands visibly shaking. He quickly snatched the paper back from David. "My apologies," he stammered, packing his battered briefcase with frantic, jerky movements. "I was misled about the nature of the documentation. I am withdrawing myself as counsel for this matter immediately." He turned and practically sprinted out of my office, leaving Brad and Chloe standing there completely exposed. Brad's jaw dropped. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to salvage whatever shredded dignity he had left. "You cannot just dismiss me," he yelled, slamming his fist on the desk again. "I am your brother-in-law. I supported this family when you were busy playing artist. I will go to the press. I will tell everyone how you stole my investment." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass. "You will not be going to the press, Brad," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You will be going to federal prison." David dropped the real paperwork on the table. My attorney opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He dropped it onto the glass surface with a heavy thud. Brad's face instantly drained of all color. He stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. "You see, Brad," I continued, "I found it very curious that a supposedly successful finance bro could not cover a resort bill in Mexico. So I had the network forensic accounting team do a little digging into your public records and property deeds. What they found was fascinating." I opened the folder and spread the documents out for Chloe to see. "Brad did not just max out my father's credit cards," I explained, keeping my eyes locked on my sister. "He took out a massive second mortgage on our parents' house. He forged Marcus' signature, manipulated Helen into signing away her equity, and dumped every single penny into a high-risk margin account. He tried to day trade his way out of his initial debt and lost it all in a bad stock market call. The bank is initiating foreclosure proceedings next week. Mom and Dad are going to lose the house and end up entirely homeless because of your perfect white knight husband." Chloe let out a piercing gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. She turned to Brad, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "Tell me she is lying," she shrieked, grabbing his arm. "Tell me you did not mortgage my parents' house. You promised me we were millionaires." Brad violently yanked his arm out of her grasp. His entire facade crumbled, revealing the cowardly, narcissistic parasite underneath. He backed away toward the door, pointing an accusatory finger right at her face. "Do not put this on me, you greedy gold digger," he spat, venom dripping from every word. "You are the one who demanded the luxury lifestyle. You had to have the designer bags, the country club memberships, the private jets to Cabo. You bled me dry just to show off to your pathetic church friends. You are useless, Chloe. You bring absolutely nothing to the table. You drove me to do this." Without another word, Brad turned and bolted through the glass doors, abandoning his wife in the middle of my office to face the wreckage alone. Chloe collapsed onto the floor. The golden child, the woman who had spent my entire life looking down her nose at me, was now sobbing on my marble tiles. Her fake empire was shattered. She realized she was completely broke, married to a criminal, and about to be the laughingstock of Atlanta. She crawled forward, grabbing the edge of my desk. "Maya, please," she begged, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "You have to help me. I cannot let my friends know I am ruined. I have a degree in communications. Hire me. Give me a job as your public relations director. I will work hard, I promise. Just pay me $100,000 a year so I can maintain my lifestyle and keep my dignity. Please, Maya, we are sisters. You owe me this much." She reached into her cheap knockoff bag and pulled out a crumpled resume, sliding it across my desk with trembling hands. I looked at the resume, then looked down at my sister kneeling on the floor. I picked up the piece of paper. I did not tear it. I simply leaned to my right and fed it directly into the heavy-duty paper shredder next to my desk. The machine whined as it chewed her pathetic request into confetti. I looked her dead in the eye. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, my voice completely devoid of pity. "You do not have the right to step foot in my company. Get out before I have security throw you out." 2 days after I kicked Chloe out, my phone lit up with a group text message. It was not from my mother, but from Aunt Shirley, the undisputed matriarch of our extended family. The message was a direct summons. Sunday dinner at Helen House. 2 in the afternoon. Pastor Williams will be joining us. Attendance is not optional, Maya. I stared at the screen knowing exactly what this was. Helen had activated her final trap card. In African American culture, the Sunday dinner is sacred ground. Bringing the pastor and aunties was a calculated tactical strike. Helen weaponized religion and pressure to force me into paying her ultimate black tax. She wanted my $500,000 to save the house Brad had secretly mortgaged and lost. I could have ignored the text. I could have stayed home and let the bank foreclose on them. But avoiding the ambush would only allow Helen to control the narrative within our community. She would spin a story about her ungrateful Hollywood daughter abandoning her parents to the streets. I needed to cut the cancer out at the root. I packed my portable cinematic projector, grabbed my laptop, and drove to my parents' house. The scent of fried chicken and collard greens hit me the moment I opened the door. It was the smell of my childhood, but today it felt like bait. I walked into the living room and found the tribunal waiting. Pastor Williams sat in my father's favorite recliner, holding a worn leather Bible. Aunt Shirley and Aunt Viv occupied the floral sofa, wearing their Sunday hats and deep disapproval. My father Marcus sat in a dining chair looking hollow and defeated. Helen perched on the love seat edge, clutching a crumpled tissue to her chest. Chloe and Brad were nowhere to be found, likely hiding from their mess. "Welcome home, Maya." Pastor Williams said, his voice dripping with that practiced pulpit resonance. "Your mother asked us here because this family faces a terrible spiritual and financial storm. We need to pray for guidance and unity." I set my heavy tote bag on the coffee table. "I am not here to pray, Pastor," I said. "I am here because I was summoned." Helen let out a loud, theatrical sob, burying her face in the tissue. "Oh, Maya," she wailed loudly. "The bank sent the final notice yesterday. We have 30 days before they lock us out of our only home. We are going to be on the street. I worked my whole life and now we have nothing." Aunt Viv shook her head, clicking her tongue. "It is a tragedy," she declared, glaring at me. "But the Lord works in mysterious ways. He blessed you with that award money for a reason, Maya. To whom much is given, much is required. You have a duty to your flesh and blood. You cannot sit in some fancy high-rise while your parents are thrown onto the pavement." Pastor Williams opened his Bible and leaned forward. "The scripture tells us to honor our father and mother, Maya. Your family is hurting. They made some unwise financial decisions, but grace is about forgiveness. You have the means to clear this debt and save their home. You have to step up and be the blessing God intended you to be. A good daughter does not turn her back on her people when they are drowning." The sheer audacity of the setup was breathtaking. Helen framed herself as the tragic victim of a financial mistake, entirely omitting that her white son-in-law stole their equity to play the stock market. She used the heavy guilt of the black tax to squeeze my money out of my hands, painting me as the villain if I refused. I looked at the aunties, nodding in agreement with the pastor. I looked at Marcus, who could not make eye contact with me. Finally, I looked at Helen, whose tear-stained eyes held smug victory. She thought she had won. She thought the church and family elders would break me. I calmly unzipped my tote bag and pulled out my portable projector. I placed it on the table and aimed the lens at the blank wall above the fireplace. "What are you doing?" Helen snapped, her fake tears vanishing. "This is not the time for your little movies." I ignored her, plugging my phone into the device. "I am a documentary filmmaker, Mom," I said, tapping the screen. "My job is to expose the truth. Since you brought the pastor and aunties here to judge my character, it is only fair they see the full picture before asking me to write a check." I reached over and hit play now. The projector beamed a crisp, bright image onto the living room wall. It was not a movie at all. It was a scan of Marcus' bank statements and property deeds. The documents showed the second mortgage initiation, the forged signatures, and the massive wire transfers directly into Brad's personal brokerage account. Pastor Williams squinted at the wall, his sermon dying in his throat. Aunt Shirley adjusted her glasses. "What are we looking at, Maya?" she asked, her voice losing its previous edge. "You are looking at the truth, Aunt Shirley," I answered. "Helen did not make a financial mistake. Brad secretly mortgaged this house and lost every single penny day trading. Helen knew about his fake wealth and let him run this family into the ground. But that is not even the best part. I tapped my screen, switching to an audio file I recovered from an old voicemail archive. The room went silent as Helen's own voice echoed through the projector speakers. I cannot stand looking at Maya. She is a stain on this family. I would rather take every dime of our savings and give it to Brad to invest than spend another penny paying for her useless art school education. Let her figure it out all by herself. The awful sound of Helen's own voice hung in the heavy air of the living room. The recorded words echoed against the walls, sealing her fate. I watched the realization wash over the faces of the people she had brought here to condemn me. Pastor William slowly closed his worn leather Bible. The soft thud sounded like a gavel. He looked at Helen with profound disgust. Aunt Shirley stood up first, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. "You brought us into your home under the guise of spiritual warfare," Aunt Shirley said, her voice shaking with rage. "You tried to use the church to steal from your own daughter just to cover up for a man who robbed your husband blind." Aunt Viv stood right behind her. "We know what it takes to build wealth in our community, Helen. You took the one child who built something real and offered her up as a sacrifice for this fake white man. You sold out your blood for country club aesthetics." Helen reached out, her hands trembling. "Sister Shirley, please, you do not understand." "Do not sister me," Aunt Shirley snapped, brushing past her. "I will pray for your soul, but I will not sit at your table." Pastor Williams adjusted his jacket. "Lead your house, Marcus," he said softly before turning toward the door. "May God have mercy on the choices made under this roof." The front door clicked shut. The silence they left behind was deafening. Helen had summoned her most powerful social weapons, and they had just walked out, leaving her defenseless. Helen stood frozen, staring at the closed door. The social standing she valued was completely destroyed. She slowly turned to face me. The mask of the victim melted away, revealing the narcissist underneath. Her eyes were wild. "You did this," she hissed, taking a step toward me. "You ruined my life." I did not move. I just crossed my arms. "You ruined your own life, Mom," I said, cold and steady. "I just provided the audio." A guttural scream ripped from Helen's throat. All the years of maintaining her perfect image finally snapped. She lunged at me, pulling her arm back with all her force, aiming a brutal slap at my face. I saw it coming a mile away. I simply took one calculated step to the left. Helen's momentum carried her forward just as Chloe rushed up behind me to intervene. The crack of flesh hitting flesh echoed through the room. Helen's hand bypassed empty air and connected squarely with Chloe's cheekbone. The force sent Chloe stumbling backward into the coffee table, knocking over a pitcher of tea. Chloe grabbed her face, letting out a sharp cry of shock. Helen gasped, looking at her stinging palm and then at her child. "Chloe, honey, I am so sorry," Helen stammered. "I meant to hit your sister." Chloe swatted Helen's hand away with vicious force. The red handprint was already swelling on her cheek, the pristine image of the golden daughter completely fractured. All the repressed anger, the financial terror, and the humiliation of the past week finally boiled over. "Do not touch me," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking. "This is all your fault." Helen recoiled. "My fault? I sacrificed everything for you to have a beautiful life." "A beautiful life," Chloe shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Brad, who was cowering near the hallway. "You call this a beautiful life? I am married to a broke criminal. You pushed me into this. You forced me to marry this fake white guy, just so you could show off to the church. You told me he was my ticket to high society. I wanted to marry David, but you said a black schoolteacher was not good enough." Marcus finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Chloe, what are you saying?" Chloe laughed, a harsh, hysterical sound. "I am saying Mom orchestrated my entire marriage, Dad. She pushed Brad on me because he drove a leased car and talked big. She literally handed him the deeds to this house because he promised to double your retirement. She sold us out for bragging rights, and now we are all going to end up homeless. You destroyed my life, Mom." Helen fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands. The entire foundation of their toxic dynamic had imploded. The golden child despised the matriarch. The savior son-in-law was a parasite. I calmly packed my portable projector back into my tote bag. You all deserve exactly what is coming to you, I said. A piercing sound shattered the neighborhood quiet. Sirens wailed loud and fast, converging on the street outside. Red and blue lights painted the living room windows. Tires screeched on the pavement, followed by heavy slamming car doors. Brad let out a terrified whimper and bolted toward the kitchen. He did not make it past the table. The heavy oak front door was violently kicked open, splintering the wood frame. Armed agents in tactical gear swarmed into the living room, shouting commands. Federal Bureau of Investigation, an agent roared, holding up a badge. "Nobody move. Keep your hands where I can see them." Helen screamed, hiding behind the sofa. Marcus raised his trembling hands. Two agents tackled Brad to the floor, pinning his arms behind his back. The sound of metal handcuffs clicking shut cut through the chaos. Bradley, an agent stated, pulling the struggling man up. "You are under arrest for wire fraud." A female agent walked directly toward my sister. "Chloe, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Chloe's eyes widened in absolute terror. She backed away, shaking her head frantically. "No, I did not do anything. I am just his wife." The agent grabbed Chloe's wrists and secured them in steel cuffs. "Your name is listed as the co-owner on 3 fraudulent shell companies used to launder stolen funds. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud." The heavy steel handcuffs clicked around Chloe's wrists with a sharp metallic snap that seemed to echo through the shattered remains of the living room. She twisted and thrashed against the federal agents, her designer heels slipping on the spilled sweet tea soaking into the carpet. "Mom, do something," she shrieked, tears of mascara running down her face. "Tell them I did not know anything. Tell them Brad tricked me. I am not a criminal." Helen was completely paralyzed. She pressed her back against the floral sofa, her mouth hanging open as she watched her golden child being hauled toward the front door like a common thief. Brad was already outside, pushed against the hood of an armored vehicle, while an agent read him his rights. The white knight of the family, the man Helen had sacrificed my future to appease, was sobbing loudly, begging the agents for a deal. Marcus watched the entire scene unfold with wide, unblinking eyes. His hands began to tremble violently. He reached up, clutching his chest as his breath came in short, ragged gasps. The illusion of his perfect, respectable life was being dismantled on his own front lawn for every neighbor to witness. Marcus let out a strained wheeze and his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, gasping for air. Helen snapped out of her trance and screamed, dropping to the floor beside him. An agent immediately grabbed his radio, calling for emergency medical services. The flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the living room walls were soon joined by the piercing wail of an ambulance siren. I watched them load my father onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask strapped to his face. The house that had been a fortress of judgment and pride was now a crime scene. The federal agents cleared out, taking Chloe and Brad to a holding facility downtown. The paramedics rushed Marcus to the nearest cardiac unit, with Helen trailing behind them in absolute hysterics. I packed up my projector and walked out the front door, stepping over the splintered wood of the frame. I did not look back. 2 days later, the final hammer of justice dropped. Brad's reckless margin trading had triggered a cascade of financial defaults. Because the second mortgage was tied directly to fraudulent activity, the bank moved with ruthless speed to cut their losses. The foreclosure was executed immediately. Helen had barely brought Marcus home from the hospital when the county sheriff arrived at their front door, accompanied by 2 bank representatives. They were given exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. Helen tried to argue. She tried to pull rank, demanding to speak to a manager, threatening to call her lawyers. The sheriff simply pointed to the official eviction notice and told her she could either walk out or be escorted out in handcuffs like her daughter. The reality of her total ruin finally crushed her spirit. With Marcus still weak and clutching his chest, Helen scrambled through the house, throwing whatever clothes she could find into 3 mismatched suitcases. They were forced out onto the pavement. A worker immediately changed the locks and slapped a bright orange foreclosure notice across the front door. Helen and Marcus stood on the curb with their cheap luggage. The luxury cars were gone, repossessed the day before. The country club friends had blocked their numbers. The church congregation treated them like pariahs. They had absolutely nothing and nowhere to go. Desperation strips away arrogance. Sitting on a bus stop bench with her ailing husband, Helen pulled out her cell phone and did the one thing she swore she would never do. She dialed the number of Mrs. Jackson, the woman she had spent years looking down upon. The phone rang 4 times before Mrs. Jackson answered with a crisp, professional greeting. Helen immediately broke into violent sobs. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. "We have lost everything. The bank took the house. Chloe is sitting in a federal holding cell. Marcus just had a heart attack and we are sitting on a public bench. We need Maya. She is the only one who can fix this. She has the money to bail Chloe out and get us a hotel. Please give me the address to her new place. You know where she lives." Mrs. Jackson let out a long, heavy sigh. "You are reaping the harvest you planted, Helen. You threw your own daughter away for a man who robbed you blind." But Mrs. Jackson was a woman of faith, and she knew Maya was protected. She gave Helen the name of the luxury high-rise in Buckhead, knowing exactly what would happen when they arrived. "I am giving you the building name," Mrs. Jackson warned. "But do not expect a warm welcome. Maya owes you nothing." Helen did not care about the warning. She only heard the location of her salvation. She spent her last $20 on a rideshare to the affluent Buckhead district. Helen and Marcus dragged their rolling suitcases through the immaculate glass doors of my luxury penthouse building. The lobby was lined with imported marble and featured a towering waterfall wall. It was a fortress of exclusivity. Helen marched straight up to the concierge desk, her old sense of entitlement flaring up for a brief fleeting moment. "I am Maya," Mother Helen demanded, tapping her fingernails on the polished stone counter. "My husband and I are here to see her. Tell her to send the private elevator down immediately. We have been through a terrible ordeal and we are moving in." The concierge did not even blink. He silently signaled to the head of security, a massive man in a tailored dark suit who immediately stepped forward and blocked their path to the elevator banks. The security chief looked at Helen and Marcus with absolute cold professionalism. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick piece of premium cardstock. He did not ask them to sit. He did not offer them water. He simply handed the paper directly to Helen. Helen snatched the paper, her eyes scanning the bold typed words. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably as she read the message. The security chief crossed his massive arms and delivered the final fatal blow to her ego. "Miss Maya has instructed me to enforce this policy with extreme prejudice," he stated, his voice echoing in the vast lobby. "People who have their names on this list are permanently banned from walking through these doors. Now turn around and leave before I have you arrested for trespassing." The humiliation at the penthouse lobby was a bitter pill, but Helen refused to swallow it. 2 weeks passed while she and Marcus languished in a humid roadside motel, smelling of bleach and desperation. Then the real estate alerts hit the local church gossip chain. The bank had officially listed their sprawling suburban home for public auction. The very house where Helen had hosted her lavish Sunday dinners and paraded Chloe around like a trophy was going to the highest bidder on the county courthouse steps. But the auction never actually happened. Less than 48 hours after the listing went live, a mystery buyer swooped in and bypassed the entire bidding process with a massive all-cash offer. The bank accepted the money immediately. Word traveled fast in their old community. Sister Beatrice, the chief gossip of First Fellowship Church, could not resist calling Helen to deliver the news. "Someone bought your property straight out of foreclosure, Helen. Paid cash over the asking price." They moved so fast the real estate agent did not even catch a name, just some corporate LLC. Instead of feeling the finality of her ruin, Helen felt a sudden overwhelming surge of narcissistic triumph. She dropped the cheap motel phone and grabbed Marcus by the shoulders, her eyes wide with manic excitement. "Do you hear that, Marcus?" she gasped, shaking him out of his depressed stupor. "A mystery cash buyer. A corporate LLC. It is Maya. She bought the house back for us." Marcus looked up, his face lined with exhaustion. "Helen, why would she do that? We are permanently banned from her building. She hates us." Helen waved her hand, dismissing his logic entirely. "You do not understand how these things work, Marcus. She was just throwing a tantrum to prove a point. She wanted to humble us. But at the end of the day, she knows her biblical duty. She knows she cannot let her parents rot in a motel while she lives in a high-rise. She bought our house back to save face. She is probably too proud to call and tell us herself. We need to go home. We need to claim our blessing right now. The delusion was absolute. Helen had convinced herself that the ultimate familial debt had been paid. In her mind, Maya had finally submitted to the matriarchal hierarchy. Helen frantically packed their few remaining belongings into the mismatched suitcases they had dragged out of the house weeks ago. She applied her signature red lipstick, smoothed out her wrinkled skirt, and ordered a rideshare. The drive back to their old neighborhood felt like a victory lap for Helen. She sat in the back of the budget sedan, with her chin held high, already planning how she would explain this miraculous return to the country club ladies. She would tell them Maya had purchased the estate as an apology gift. She would spin it into a story of a prodigal daughter returning to honor her mother. Marcus sat silently beside her, staring out the window with a look of deep uncertainty, but he lacked the backbone to stop her reckless momentum. The car pulled up to the familiar curb. The bright orange foreclosure notice that had previously scarred the front door was gone. The lawn was freshly manicured. Helen shoved a crumpled $20 bill at the driver and marched up the driveway, hauling her luggage with renewed vigor. She noticed the curtains twitched in the house next door. The neighbors were definitely watching. Helen gave a theatrical royal wave to the empty street, making sure everyone knew the queen had returned to her castle. Marcus trailed behind, dragging his heavy feet. "Helen, do not you think we should call first? What if we are wrong?" Helen scoffed, digging into the bottom of her purse. "Have some faith, Marcus. The Lord laid it on her heart to restore us. I kept my emergency spare key. I knew we would need it." She jammed the brass key into the front door lock. It turned with a satisfying click. Helen pushed the heavy oak door open, stepping confidently into the grand foyer. "We are home," she announced, her voice echoing loudly. But the echo was entirely wrong. It sounded hollow, metallic, and vast. Helen stopped dead in her tracks, her designer suitcase slipping from her grasp and hitting the floor with a loud thud. The pristine crystal chandelier was gone. The expensive Persian rugs had been ripped up, exposing the bare concrete foundation. Her antique console table, the velvet love seats, the oil paintings she had bought to impress the pastor, everything was completely vanished. The house had been gutted down to the studs. "What is going on here?" Marcus whispered, stepping in behind her. "This is not our furniture." The space did not look like a home anymore. It looked like a commercial construction zone. Heavy canvas drop cloths covered the floors. Metal scaffolding reached up toward the vaulted ceiling in the main living room. The sound of power drills and loud music echoed from the kitchen area. Workers in paint-splattered overalls were moving briskly, carrying large sheets of drywall and buckets of vibrant paint. Helen stood paralyzed, her brain unable to process the destruction of her carefully curated domestic sanctuary. She took a few shaky steps into the living room, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The reality of the situation clashed violently with her grand delusions. On the massive main wall, where her family portrait used to hang, a team of painters stood on the scaffolding. They were not applying a neutral beige or a tasteful cream. They were actively rolling thick coats of bright electric colors. Above the scaffolding, a massive projection mapped out a bold modern design. The painters were carefully filling in the projected lines, tracing out a giant, vibrant logo right in the center of the living room wall. Helen squinted her eyes, straining to read the massive letters taking shape across the drywall. Her heart stopped beating as the bold painted words finally registered in her mind. The letters were massive, painted in a vibrant, striking shade of blue that commanded absolute attention. Helen mouthed the words silently as the painter finished the final sweeping arch of the letter N. It read, "Jackson Youth Arts Support Center." The name hit her like a physical blow to the chest. It was not a tribute to the family legacy she had spent decades obsessing over. It was a monument to the very people she had looked down upon. The working-class couple who had fed her daughter when she refused to. The people Maya had publicly claimed as her real parents on national television. Marcus dropped his suitcase, the handle clattering against the bare concrete floor. "What is this?" He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "Why does it say Jackson?" A voice cut through the loud hum of the construction site. "Because they actually earned it." I stepped out from what used to be the formal dining room, holding a rolled-up set of blueprints. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson walked proudly right beside me. They were not wearing cheap motel clothes or carrying the weight of a ruined reputation. They wore custom-tailored blazers and radiated the kind of quiet, genuine dignity that Helen could never buy. I stopped a few feet away from the people who had brought me into this world, looking at them with nothing but absolute indifference. Maya Helen gasped, taking a step forward, her hands reaching out in a desperate grasping motion. You bought the house. You paid the bank. I knew you would not let us live on the street. I knew you would fix this. You just wanted to scare us, right? But why are you painting their name on my living room wall? I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked her dead in the eye and delivered the reality check she had been dodging for weeks. This is not your living room, Mom. This is a commercial property zoned for community development. I bought this foreclosed estate with cash. Every single penny came from the documentary award money you tried to steal. But I did not buy it to save you. I bought it to build a sanctuary for kids in this neighborhood who have toxic, unsupportive parents. I bought it for my real family and my community, not for parasites who only show up when the check clears. Helen's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She lunged forward, her voice escalating into a frantic shriek. You vicious, ungrateful brat, she screamed. You stole my house. You stole my life. You are going to give this property back to us right now. Marcus is your father. I am your mother. You owe us. I just smiled, stepping aside as heavy boots sounded on the front porch. I do not owe you anything, I said smoothly. But you owe the county an explanation for criminal trespassing. Two uniformed police officers walked through the front door, their hands resting casually on their duty belts. I had called the local precinct the moment my security cameras alerted me that Helen and Marcus were pulling up the driveway. The older officer stepped between me and my screaming mother. Ma'am, he said, his voice stern and commanding. We received a call from the property owner about unauthorized individuals breaking into an active construction site. You need to vacate the premises immediately. Helen turned her rage onto the officer, pointing a shaking finger at my face. I am her mother, she yelled. This is my house. I lived here for 20 years. She is throwing her own parents out into the street. Arrest her. The officer did not even blink. The bank foreclosed on this property. You have no legal right to be here. If you do not pick up your bags and exit the building right now, you will be arrested for trespassing and breaking and entering. Marcus grabbed Helen's arm, his face pale with humiliation and fear. Helen, stop! He pleaded, his voice cracking. They are going to put us in jail. We have to go. Please just stop. The officers did not give them a choice. They physically stepped forward, forcing Helen and Marcus to back up toward the door. Mr. Jackson walked over and picked up the suitcase Helen had dropped, tossing it carelessly onto the front porch. Have a blessed day now, Mr. Jackson said, his voice dripping with southern politeness that cut deeper than any insult. The public humiliation outside was even worse than the confrontation inside. The entire neighborhood had gathered on their manicured lawns and sidewalks, drawn by the flashing lights of the police cruisers. Sister Beatrice and several other women from the church were standing right across the street, holding their cell phones up and recording every single second of the eviction. Helen and Marcus were marched down the driveway by the police, dragging their cheap luggage over the pavement, while the people they used to desperately impress watched them in absolute disgrace. The police officers stood on the curb, ensuring Helen and Marcus did not try to cross back onto my property line. I stood on the porch, flanked by the Jacksons, watching the ultimate collapse of the matriarchal empire that had tortured me for decades. Helen sat heavily on her suitcase on the public sidewalk, sobbing hysterically, while Marcus stood beside her, clutching his chest and looking at the ground. Then Helen's phone rang loudly. She scrambled to answer it. It was her defense attorney. I watched her face drain of color. Her jaw dropped and a strangled gasp escaped her throat. She looked at Marcus, her eyes wide with pure terror. What is it? Marcus asked, trembling with dread. Chloe took a plea deal, she choked out. She told federal prosecutors that you were complicit in the fraud scheme. They are issuing a warrant for your arrest. Our daughter just sold you out. The news of my sister cutting a plea deal hit the family wreckage like a wrecking ball. I received the transcript of her federal deposition through my legal team, and reading her exact words was a masterclass in survival at any cost. Sitting in an uncomfortable metal chair inside the bleak interrogation room, Chloe completely abandoned any remaining loyalty to her parents. She looked the federal prosecutor dead in the eye and traded her father's freedom for a reduced sentence. She claimed Marcus was fully aware of Brad's shady financial transactions from the very beginning. According to her sworn statement, Marcus saw the fabricated bank statements, the unauthorized credit applications, and the questionable wire transfers, but deliberately turned a blind eye to keep the money flowing. He loved the country club memberships, the designer suits, and the luxury cars too much to ask questions, she testified, her voice recorded on the official court tape. He knew Brad was using his name to open those offshore accounts, and he let it happen because he desperately wanted to show off to the church elders and maintain his elevated status. My golden sister, the one they sacrificed my future for, had just handed the feds the final nail for my father's coffin, ensuring he would face maximum penalties without a shadow of a doubt. Meanwhile, Helen was hitting a new absolute rock bottom. The grand matriarch who once hosted lavish Sunday dinners and judged everyone from her elevated pedestal was now confined to a dingy roadside motel room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. With no house, no luxury cars, and her husband facing an imminent federal indictment, her social currency was completely bankrupt. The harsh reality of her poverty should have humbled her, but narcissists never truly surrender. They simply changed their stage. Denied access to her church congregation and blocked by her country club friends, Helen found a new audience willing to consume her toxicity. She reached out to a local Atlanta gossip podcast known for peddling sensationalized drama and tearing down successful Black women. The hosts, hungry for clickbait and viral engagement, eagerly invited the disgraced mother of the newly famous documentary filmmaker onto their show. They set up a live stream, heavily promoting an exclusive tell-all interview that promised to expose the dark secrets behind my sudden Hollywood success. They wanted a spectacle, and Helen was more than ready to provide one. Sitting in front of a cheap ring light with her makeup carefully applied to look tragic but dignified, Helen began her performance. I watched the live stream from my production office, my arms crossed as she weaponized her tears for the camera. She completely ignored her own greed, the stolen equity, and Brad's criminal enterprise that caused their downfall. Instead, she painted a vivid, agonizing picture of herself as a devoted mother who gave everything to a heartless daughter. She wept uncontrollably, wiping her eyes as she described Marcus's recent heart attack. "He is an old, sick man," she cried into the microphone, her voice shaking with practiced grief. "He worked his fingers to the bone to pay for her art school, and the moment she got a taste of that Hollywood money, she threw us away like garbage. She left her sick father on the street to die, just so she could buy a fancy penthouse and hang out with celebrities. She is ungrateful, cold, and completely dead to the Lord. She even claimed I bribed the police to evict them." The podcast hosts ate it up, nodding sympathetically and encouraging the live chat to bash my character. The comment section became a toxic wasteland of people calling me a sellout, a terrible daughter, and a disgrace to the entire community. They thought they were destroying my career, but they had no idea who they were messing with. I did not need to defend myself on social media. My multi-million-dollar network did not take kindly to local podcasters slandering their star executive producer. Just as Helen launched into another entirely fabricated story about me, the podcast hosts excitedly announced they were taking a live caller from the hotline. They expected a sympathetic listener ready to bash me even further. They put the caller on speakerphone for the thousands of viewers watching live. "Good evening, you are on the air with Helen," one host beamed, adjusting his headphones. The voice that came through the studio speakers was sharp, authoritative, and absolutely lethal. "This is David Sterling, Senior Legal Counsel for Global Media Network," the voice stated, freezing the hosts in their tracks. "I am calling to issue an immediate and binding cease and desist order to this podcast, its producers, and your current guest, Helen. You are actively broadcasting defamatory statements, libelous falsehoods, and malicious character assassination against our network's key talent." Helen's face dropped, her fake tears instantly vanishing into an expression of pure dread. The podcast hosts scrambled, panicking and trying to reach for the soundboard, but the lawyer continued, his voice slicing through their chaos with clinical precision. We have recorded every single second of this broadcast. We have logged every false claim and defamatory accusation. If this stream is not terminated in exactly 10 seconds, we will file a defamation lawsuit that will liquidate every single asset your production company owns. We will seize your studio, your equipment, your personal bank accounts, and we will ensure you never broadcast in this state again. 10 seconds. The hosts looked at each other in sheer absolute terror. They did not even bother to say goodbye to their viewers or apologize to their guest. One panicked host lunged forward and forcefully yanked the power cord straight out of the wall. The live feed abruptly cut to static blackness, leaving Helen sitting in the dark studio completely silenced and entirely defeated. Her final desperate attempt to destroy my hard-earned reputation had been mercilessly crushed in front of a live audience. The blackout of Helen's desperate broadcast signaled the absolute end of her reign of terror. I did not celebrate or gloat. I simply closed my laptop and returned to my production schedule. 3 days passed without a single whisper from my mother or the disgraced podcast hosts. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar prepaid number. It was Marcus. He asked to meet at a small independent coffee shop on the outskirts of the city, far away from the glitz of Buckhead and the ruins of his former suburban life. Against the advice of my legal team, I agreed. I needed to look the man who contributed half my DNA in the eye one last time. I arrived early and secured a booth in the back corner. The bell above the door chimed and Marcus walked in. The sight of him was jarring. The man who used to strut through the country club wearing tailored suits and an air of unearned superiority was completely gone. In his place was a frail, defeated old man. He wore a faded sweater that hung loosely over his shrinking frame. His shoulders were slumped, and his hands trembled violently as he navigated between the tables. He slid into the booth across from me, refusing to meet my gaze. He did not possess Helen's fiery delusion or Chloe's venomous entitlement. He just looked thoroughly broken. "Thank you for coming, Maya," he muttered, his voice raspy and thin. "I know you had every reason to ignore my message." I kept my hands folded on the table. "State your business, Marcus." "I have a production meeting in an hour, and I do not intend to be late." He swallowed hard, staring down at the scratched wooden surface of the table. "The federal prosecutors are moving forward with the indictment. My court date is set for next month. The public defender they assigned to me is overwhelmed. He has dozens of cases, and he barely looks at my file. I am looking at serious prison time, Maya. I need a real defense attorney. I need someone who can argue that I was manipulated by Brad and Helen. But I have absolutely nothing left. The bank took everything." He finally looked up, his eyes brimming with desperate tears. "I am begging you, Maya, please. You have the resources. Just a loan to cover a private lawyer. I will spend the rest of my life paying you back." I looked at the man pleading for his freedom and felt a profound, chilling emptiness. I did not feel pity. I did not feel rage. I only saw the staggering hypocrisy of his request. "You want me to finance your defense?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You want me to hand over the money I earned through my own actively participated in?" "I did not know the extent of it," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. "Helen and Brad handled the paperwork. I just signed where they told me to. I was foolish, but I am not a criminal mastermind." "You are a coward," I stated, leaning forward so my words would strike him directly. "You have always been a coward, Marcus. This is not just about the wire fraud or the second mortgage. This is about 30 years of you looking the other way." Marcus flinched, shrinking back into the vinyl booth. "I did the best I could," he whispered defensively. "Helen has a very strong personality. You know how she gets. I just wanted to keep the peace in our house." "Keep the peace." I repeated, the anger finally rising in my chest. "You bought your peace with my suffering. When Helen called me a stain on the family, you sat in your recliner and read the newspaper. When Chloe paraded around in designer clothes while I worked double shifts to buy my own winter coat, you handed her your credit card and told me to build character. You watched your wife systematically destroy my self-worth, and you chose absolute silence because it was easier than standing up to her. "I thought you were strong," Marcus choked out, wiping a tear from his cheek. "You were always so independent. I thought you could handle it." Chloe needed more guidance. I slammed my hand down on the table, making our coffee cups rattle. "Do not you dare rewrite history," I demanded. "I was a child. I was your child. I did not ask to be independent. I was forced to be fiercely independent because the two people responsible for protecting me threw me to the wolves. You enabled every single piece of abuse in that house. You let Helen weaponize her maternal title while you played the innocent bystander. Your silence was a choice, Marcus. Your passivity was an endorsement of her cruelty." Marcus lowered his head, weeping openly into his hands. "I am sorry," he sobbed. "I am so sorry, Maya. I failed you. I was a terrible father." "Your apologies are 20 years too late," I said, reaching into my designer tote bag. I pulled out a crisp $20 bill and placed it on the table to cover our coffees. Then I reached into my card holder and extracted a plain white business card. I slid it across the table toward his trembling hands. "What is this?" he asked, wiping his eyes. "It is the contact information for a highly rated public defender who specializes in federal fraud cases." I explained, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. "I am not giving you a single dime of my money, Marcus. I will not fund your legal defense. I will not pay for the mistakes you made while trying to impress the church elders. You will use the public defender provided by the state, and you will face the judge like every other citizen who breaks the law." I stood up, picking up my bag and smoothing my jacket. "This is the last time we will ever speak. Do not contact my office. Do not text me. You are officially out of my life." I turned on my heel and took 2 steps toward the door. "Maya, wait!" Marcus cried out, his voice cracking with a new frantic desperation. "Please, there is something else. Something you need to know before you walk away forever." I stopped, but I did not turn around. "You have 10 seconds," I warned. I can hear him struggling to catch his breath behind me. "It is about your college savings," he choked out, the words rushing from his mouth as if he were purging a poison. "The account you started working for when you were 15. I froze. The memory hit me like a physical blow. When I was 18, ready to enroll in film school, I went to the bank to withdraw the thousands of dollars I had meticulously saved from tutoring and retail jobs. The teller told me the account was completely empty. Helen had convinced me that identity thieves had drained the funds, forcing me to take out predatory student loans that nearly crushed my future." "What about it?" I asked, turning my head slightly. "It was not hackers," Marcus confessed, weeping uncontrollably now. "It was not identity theft. Helen had her name on the account as a custodial parent. When Chloe and Brad got engaged, Brad demanded a $50,000 wedding to impress his finance friends. We did not have enough liquid cash. Helen went to the bank and withdrew every single penny of your tuition money. She drained your savings to pay for the floral arrangements and the catering at Chloe's wedding. And she made me swear I would never tell you." The coffee shop faded into complete silence. My hands balled into tight fists at my sides. Every struggle, every late-night shift, every moment of financial terror I endured in my early 20s had been manufactured by my own mother to fund a fraudulent wedding for a fake millionaire. I did not scream. I did not cry. The revelation simply solidified the steel in my spine. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Marcus to drown in his own guilt. The revelation about my college savings severed the last invisible string, tying me to the people who shared my blood. I left Marcus weeping in that coffee shop and immediately shifted my focus to the upcoming federal trial. 1 month later, the grand marble halls of the federal courthouse served as the stage for Brad's desperate final performance. The atmosphere was thick with tension as I walked through the heavy oak double doors of the courtroom. The trial had already been underway for 2 days, and Brad's high-priced defense attorney was currently executing the most cowardly legal strategy imaginable. I listened as the attorney paced in front of the jury box, painting a fabricated portrait of his client. Brad sat at the defense table, looking deliberately disheveled, trying to appear like a broken man rather than a calculated thief. His lawyer pitched a narrative steeped in subtle racial dog whistles and blatant victim blaming. He claimed Brad was an earnest, naive financial advisor who had been targeted and financially drained by a greedy, status-obsessed family. The attorney argued that Helen and Marcus demanded an extravagant lifestyle they could not afford, holding Brad's marriage to Chloe hostage unless he provided them with luxury cars, country club memberships, and front-row seats at their mega-church. According to the defense, my parents had relentlessly pressured this poor white man into securing the fraudulent second mortgage, twisting his arm until he broke the law, just to keep his demanding mother-in-law happy. It was a vile, disgusting defense strategy that completely erased Brad's own narcissistic greed and shifted the entirety of the blame onto Marcus and Helen. I did not sit in the gallery section designated for the families of the defendants. That section was currently occupied by a pale, trembling Marcus and a seething Helen, who looked like she was vibrating with barely contained rage. Instead, I flashed my media credentials to the bailiff and walked directly into the cordoned-off press box on the right side of the courtroom. I was not there as a supportive sister or a grieving daughter. I was there as an executive producer. I carried a sleek high-definition cinema camera and set it up right on the press railing, aiming the lens directly at the defense table and the family section. My next feature-length documentary was already greenlit by the streaming network, focusing on white-collar crime and the devastating ripple effects of financial abuse. My own family was going to be the prime case study. I adjusted the focus ring, zooming in tightly on Helen's face. Just as she turned her head and noticed me, I watched through the digital monitor as the color drained from her cheeks before flushing into a violent shade of red. She saw the media badge hanging around my neck. She saw the red recording light blinking on my camera. The realization that her ultimate downfall, her public humiliation, was being professionally documented for a global audience shattered whatever fragile grip she still had on her sanity. For decades, Helen had controlled her image with an iron fist, hiding her cruelty behind expensive hats and Sunday morning hallelujahs. Now her son-in-law was calling her a gold-digging parasite on federal record, and her estranged daughter was filming the wreckage. The prosecuting attorney stood up to object to a statement made by Brad's lawyer, but he was completely drowned out by a sudden guttural screech. Helen snapped. She bolted upright from the wooden bench, knocking her purse to the floor. "Put that camera down, you ungrateful demon," she screamed, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at the press box. "She is filming us. She is trying to profit off my misery. Make her stop right now." The federal judge, a stern man with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, immediately banged his wooden gavel. "Ma'am, sit down and remain silent," he ordered, his voice booming over the microphone. "This is a federal courtroom, not a reality television show." But Helen was too far gone. The narcissistic collapse was absolute and catastrophic. She ignored the judge entirely and shoved her way past Marcus, violently kicking the swinging wooden gate that separated the gallery from the main floor. "You ruined my life!" Helen shrieked, her eyes wild and unfocused as she lunged toward the barricade protecting the press area. "I gave you everything. I took your college money because you did not deserve it. I will kill you. I will kill you." She did not make it within 10 feet of me. 3 heavily armed United States Marshals tackled her mid-stride. They brought her down hard against the polished hardwood floor, pinning her arms behind her back. Helen thrashed and kicked, screaming profanities that echoed against the high vaulted ceiling. The judge slammed his gavel down repeatedly, drowning out her shrieks. "I hold you in direct contempt of court," he roared, pointing at Helen, as the marshals secured steel handcuffs around her wrists. "Take her into custody immediately. 30 days in the county jail without bail. Get her out of my courtroom." I kept the camera rolling, perfectly framing the shot as my mother was dragged out of the federal building in handcuffs, her designer dress ruined, and her reputation permanently destroyed. Marcus sat frozen in his seat, clutching his chest, while the jury watched the entire spectacle in absolute stunned silence. Brad buried his face in his hands, knowing his defense strategy had just been completely overshadowed by his mother-in-law's unhinged violence. Order was eventually restored, and the trial concluded with closing arguments that afternoon. The judge delivered his instructions, and the 12 members of the jury were escorted to the back rooms to deliberate. Given the mountain of financial documents, the forged signatures, and the complex shell companies created by Brad, legal experts in the press box predicted they would be deliberating for at least 3 days. The sheer volume of evidence was staggering. I packed up my camera gear, preparing to head back to my production office to review the footage. I was just zipping up my equipment bag when the heavy wooden door to the deliberation room swung open. The sudden noise made the entire courtroom go dead silent. The bailiff stepped out and handed a slip of paper to the judge. It had been exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes. A collective gasp rippled through the press box. A jury returning in under 2 hours in a complex federal fraud case meant only one thing. There was absolutely no debate. There was no hesitation. The speed of the verdict indicated a total bloodbath was about to be unleashed on the defendants. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked out across the tense, silent room. "Bring the jury back in," he commanded. "We have a verdict." The 12 men and women of the jury filed back into the courtroom with grim determination. They did not look at the defense table. They did not look at the gallery. The foreperson handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The silence in the federal courtroom was absolute. The judge unfolded the paper and read the decision with zero emotion. On all charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes, the jury finds the defendant Bradley guilty. On the charges of acting as a co-conspirator and maintaining fraudulent shell companies, the jury finds the defendant, Chloe, guilty. On the charges of financial negligence and complicity, the jury finds the defendant, Marcus, guilty. Brad collapsed back into his heavy wooden chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. A loud, pathetic sob ripped from his throat. Chloe simply stared straight ahead, her eyes wide and vacant, completely paralyzed by the reality of her ruined life. Marcus clutched his chest, gasping for air, as the gravity of his felony conviction settled over him. The sentencing phase was swift and merciless. The federal judge looked down from his elevated bench, surveying the wreckage of my former family with undisguised contempt. Bradley, the judge, stated, his voice booming through the microphone, "You orchestrated a calculated scheme to defraud innocent parties and manipulate financial institutions. You are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole." Brad let out a strangled cry as the marshals immediately stepped forward to place him in handcuffs. "Chloe," the judge continued, shifting his piercing gaze to my sister, "you willingly participated in a criminal enterprise to fund a luxury lifestyle you did not earn. You are sentenced to 3 years in federal prison." Chloe finally broke. She shrieked violently, begging the judge for mercy, claiming she was tricked, but the marshals grabbed her arms and hauled her up to join her husband. Finally, the judge looked at Marcus. "Marcus, you enabled this entire operation through sheer cowardice and willful ignorance. Given your deteriorating health and lack of prior offenses, you are sentenced to 5 years of supervised probation. However, you are ordered to pay full restitution. Every remaining asset you possess will be liquidated. You are entirely bankrupt, and you will carry the permanent stain of a federal felony conviction for the rest of your life." The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The empire of lies was officially dead. While Marcus was being processed by his probation officers, Helen was serving her mandatory sentence for courtroom disruption. 30 days later, the heavy metal doors of the county jail buzzed open. Helen stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun, wearing the same wrinkled designer dress she had been arrested in. She clutched her personal belongings in a clear plastic bag. She stood on the concrete sidewalk waiting for her rescue. She expected a luxury car to pull up. She expected her church friends to welcome her back with open arms and sympathetic prayers. Nobody came. Helen stood on that corner for 2 hours. The blazing Georgia heat beat down on her unwashed hair. She finally walked to a nearby gas station and used the payphone to call Sister Beatrice, expecting a warm voice. The line clicked and Sister Beatrice answered. Helen started sobbing immediately, begging for a ride and a place to stay. Sister Beatrice cut her off completely. "Do not ever call this number again, Helen. You are a disgrace to the congregation and a thief in the eyes of the Lord. The church board has officially revoked your membership." Sister Beatrice hung up. Helen tried calling 4 other numbers. Every single one was either disconnected or went straight to voicemail. The community had completely exiled her. She was a pariah. With less than $50 in her pocket, The former queen of the suburban country club was forced to board a public city bus. She rode in silence, her head bowed in shame, heading toward a cheap roach-infested motel on the worst side of town. She had absolutely no money, no family, and no future. While my biological family was rotting in prison cells and cheap motels, my ascent reached the stratosphere. I was sitting in the executive boardroom of a towering glass skyscraper in Los Angeles. Across the massive mahogany table sat the senior acquisition team for the largest streaming platform on the planet. They had flown me out first class to finalize the biggest deal of my entire career. My lead attorney, David, slid a thick contract across the polished wood. The streaming network executive smiled, passing me a solid gold pen. "We have reviewed the initial footage for your white-collar crime documentary." Maya, the lead executive, said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "It is a masterpiece. Your ability to capture the raw, devastating reality of financial abuse and family betrayal is unprecedented. We want exclusive global distribution rights." I picked up the pen and looked at the number printed on the final page of the contract. $10 million. This was not just a distribution deal. This was generational wealth. This was the ultimate, undeniable proof that I had won. I signed my name with a steady hand. The room erupted into applause. My production company was now a major player in Hollywood. I had taken the deepest trauma of my life and spun it into absolute gold. I flew back to Atlanta that same evening, stepping into my penthouse office with a renewed sense of purpose. My team had already set up a celebratory spread. Champagne bottles were chilling in silver buckets. The music was playing and the energy was electric. I poured a glass of champagne ready to toast to our massive success. Before I could raise my glass, the heavy glass doors of my office swung open. Tara, my best friend and executive producer, walked in. She was not smiling. She bypassed the champagne completely and walked straight toward my desk. The festive music in the background suddenly felt entirely out of place. Tara reached into her tailored blazer pocket. She pulled out a cheap, crumpled manila envelope. It was stained and covered in ugly red institutional stamps. She placed it carefully onto the pristine glass surface of my desk. The room seemed to go completely still. "What is that?" I asked, setting my champagne flute down. Tara looked me dead in the eye, her expression deadly serious. "One of our production assistants found it stuffed inside the company mailbag this morning. It bypassed the normal security screening because it was marked as confidential legal correspondence. It was smuggled out of the Federal Correctional Facility." I stared at the ugly, crumpled envelope. The handwriting on the front was erratic and frantic, but I recognized the looping cursive immediately. It was the exact same handwriting that used to sign mocking birthday cards and fake apologies. "It is from Chloe," Tara said softly. "She wants to talk." I stared at the crumpled envelope on my pristine glass desk. The paper carried the sterile smell of a federal facility. Tara watched me closely as I picked it up. The red institutional stamps glared back at me, but the familiar looping cursive handwriting made my stomach tighten. It was the exact handwriting Chloe used to write fake apologies when we were kids, after breaking my things and blaming me. Now she was using it from inside a prison cell. I slid my silver letter opener across the flap and pulled out 3 pages of closely written notebook paper filled with desperation. "Dear Maya," the letter began. The ink smudged as if she squeezed out strategic tears. "I have no right to ask you for anything, but I am begging you to listen. Prison is a nightmare. The food is inedible, and I do not have a single dollar in my commissary account. I cannot even buy soap or phone minutes. I need you to deposit some money for me, Maya. Just a few $100s. You have millions now. It means nothing to you, but it would save my life in here." I read further down, scanning her pathetic attempts at manipulation. She wrote paragraphs about finding God behind bars. She claimed she completely changed that. Isolation opened her eyes to how toxic Helen and Brad had been. She blamed our mother for brainwashing her and her husband for his criminal enterprise. "I never wanted to hurt you, Maya," she pleaded. "We are blood. We are sisters. Please do not leave me to rot in this place. Send the money and let us start over. I promise I am a different person now." I finished reading the last sentence and set the pages down on the glass. I did not feel pity, anger, or resentment. I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional cord that once tied me to my biological sister was permanently severed. I reached across my desk and pulled a heavy crystal ashtray toward me. It was a vintage piece kept strictly for decoration, but today it had a practical use. I picked up a sleek silver lighter, flicked the lid open, and ignited a bright blue flame. I held the corner of Chloe's letter to the fire. The cheap notebook paper caught instantly. I dropped the burning pages into the crystal bowl and watched the flames consume her pathetic lies. The fire chewed through her fake apologies and her desperate pleas for cash, turning her words into curling black ash. A thin trail of gray smoke drifted up toward the ceiling. Tara stood across the desk, her arms folded, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Are we sending a reply?" Tara asked, her voice laced with dry amusement. I watched the last corner of the paper turn to dust. "No," I said calmly. "I do not have a sister." 2 weeks later, I traded the sterile air of my production office for the vibrant, pounding energy of my hometown streets. It was the official grand opening of the Jackson Youth Arts Support Center. The sprawling suburban estate that had once been a fortress of Helen. Toxic ego was now transformed into a beacon of hope for the entire community. I threw a massive block party to celebrate, and the turnout was nothing short of spectacular. We blocked off the entire street, food trucks lined the pavement, serving up ribs, brisket, and fried catfish. A local DJ set up giant speakers on the front lawn, blasting joyful music that vibrated right through the soles of my shoes. The driveway where Helen and Marcus had once been humiliated and evicted was now filled with neighborhood teenagers holding professional camera equipment. They were laughing, interviewing each other, and learning how to frame the perfect shot. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson stood on the front porch, beaming with absolute pride as they cut the thick blue ribbons strung across the entrance. The community members who had previously judged me based on Helen, vicious gossip, were now shaking my hand, thanking me for investing in their children. The air was thick with the beautiful, undeniable magic of Black excellence and genuine community support. I had taken a house built on fraud and turned it into a sanctuary built on unconditional love. I stood near the food trucks holding a plate of barbecue, watching the kids run through the open doors of the center. I had won. I had protected my peace, secured my wealth, and created a legacy that nobody could ever take away. I took a deep breath, letting the joyful noise wash over me. Everything was absolutely perfect. Then the music suddenly seemed to fade into the background. A massive bulletproof black SUV turned the corner and rolled slowly down the street. It was a vehicle that belonged in Beverly Hills, not a suburban neighborhood in Atlanta. The sheer size and imposing presence of the vehicle commanded immediate attention. The crowd naturally parted ways as the SUV crept forward, its heavily tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. The vehicle glided to a smooth stop right in front of the Jackson Youth Arts Support Center, perfectly aligning with the freshly painted blue logo on the exterior wall. The heavy armored door swung open. A towering security guard stepped out first, scanning the crowded street with sharp tactical precision. Then the passenger stepped out. It was a man wearing designer sunglasses and a meticulously tailored casual suit that screamed old Hollywood money. He was an A-list producer, a titan of the film industry, whose name alone could greenlight a $100 million blockbuster. He took off his sunglasses, letting his eyes sweep over the food trucks, the dancing kids, and the newly renovated community center. His gaze locked directly onto me, standing by the curb. He never smiled. He adjusted his jacket and began walking straight through the parted crowd, moving with terrifying, deliberate purpose. He was looking for me. Paramedics rushed through the swinging wooden doors of the courtroom to scrape Uncle Marcus off the floor. I did not stay to watch them load the disgraced pastor onto a stretcher. I calmly packed my legal ledger, snapped my briefcase shut, and walked out of the double doors into the wide, sunlit marble hallway of the federal courthouse. The air outside the courtroom felt instantly lighter, purged of the toxic entitlement and fake religious superiority that had suffocated me for 32 years. I pressed the silver button for the elevator, ready to return to the empire I built from nothing. Maya, wait. Vivian's voice echoed down the long corridor, shrill, broken, and dripping with desperate manipulation. She ran toward me, the heels of her scuffed shoes clicking erratically against the stone floor. Her face was stained with cheap mascara, her carefully constructed elite matriarch mask completely melted away. She threw her arms open wide, lunging forward to pull me into a frantic, tearful embrace. I took a sharp, immediate step backward. My sheer physical repulsion stopped her dead in her tracks. "Please, Maya," Vivian sobbed, her hands clutching at the empty air between us. "You have made your point. You proved you are the smartest person in the room. You took the luxury cars, you took the house, you took my elite country club memberships. But at the end of the day, we are still a black family. Blood is thicker than water. You cannot just leave your own mother destitute like this. We have to stick together. We can start over." I stared at the woman who had traded my college tuition at Spelman for her Jack and Jill membership dues. I looked at the exact same hands that had eagerly packed my belongings into black garbage bags when she kicked me out onto the street. She was not crying because she loved me. She was crying because she had finally run out of victims to financially exploit. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, notarized manila envelope. I did not hand it to her directly. I let it drop from my fingers, landing onto the marble floor right at her scuffed beige shoes. "That is a legally binding cease and desist order," I stated, my voice echoing with icy, unshakable finality. "It details a formal, permanent renunciation of all familial ties. If you call my personal phone, if you approach my corporate headquarters, if you even attempt to speak my name to the press or your remaining church friends again, my legal team will file immediate harassment charges. You are legally barred from claiming me as your daughter in any capacity. You are nothing to me but a liquidated debtor." Vivian stared at the heavy envelope on the floor, as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "You cannot sever blood ties, Maya. I gave you life. You owe me your very existence. You owe this family your respect. Blood is exactly what you drained from me for decades." I fired back, stepping closer and forcing her to look me directly in the eye. "You and Marcus operated like emotional and financial vampires. You sucked the financial lifeblood out of my hardworking father until his heart gave out from the stress. Then you immediately turned your fangs on me. You tried to drain my startup trust to fund Jasmine's fraudulent medical school tuition and Trent's pathetic country club bar tabs. You weaponized the concept of blood loyalty only when you needed a convenient human shield to protect your own absolute corruption." Vivian opened her mouth to argue, but I reached into my briefcase one last time. I pulled out a certified court decree. I held it up so Vivian could clearly read the bold black text stamped by a federal judge just 2 days prior. "For 32 years, I carried your hyphenated maiden name because you were so incredibly desperate to cling to your fake high society lineage," I said, watching her eyes widen in pure horror as she read the legal document. "You thought hyphenating my name with your elite family title would make me respectable enough for your snobby church friends. You constantly bragged about your generational wealth and your prestigious alumni status, while looking down on my father because he built his wealth with his bare hands instead of inheriting it. Well, as of this week, your precious name is legally dead to me. I formally petitioned the court to strip your maiden name from my legal identity. I am now Maya Harrison. I am my father's daughter, and only my father's daughter. I have completely erased your toxic legacy from my life forever." Vivian let out a strangled, breathless gasp, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck by a speeding vehicle. Erasing her name was the ultimate unforgivable insult to a woman whose entire existence revolved around social perception and elite alumni status. Her knees buckled slightly, the reality of her total erasure hitting her harder than the bankruptcy ruling itself. She had nothing left to leverage, not even her own bloodline. The generational dynasty she weaponized to manipulate her community had officially rejected her. I turned my back on her for the final time. The elevator doors opened with a soft, melodic chime. I stepped inside the steel carriage and pressed the lobby button, leaving Vivian weeping alone on the cold marble floor, alongside the legal documents she refused to pick up. I walked out of the federal courthouse, pushing through the heavy glass doors, and descended the wide concrete steps into the bright, crisp afternoon sunlight. The city noise washed over me, and the air tasted like absolute, undeniable victory. My cell phone vibrated sharply in my tailored pocket. I answered the call from my executive assistant. Miss Harrison, my assistant, said, her voice buzzing with urgent electric excitement. We just received the official notice from the county liquidation board. Uncle Marcus' foreclosed mega mansion was just listed by the federal marshals. It goes up for public auction in exactly 24 hours. The towering man stopped 2 feet away. He removed his sunglasses, revealing piercing brown eyes that had evaluated 1,000 Hollywood scripts. He was Elijah Sterling, the most powerful executive producer in the film industry. A man whose name guaranteed a 9-figure box office return. The loud music from the block party muted itself as he extended a hand bearing a platinum watch. Maya, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who owned entire studios. I have been looking for you. I shook his hand, maintaining my composure. You found me, Mr. Sterling, I replied evenly. What brings a Los Angeles titan to a neighborhood block party in Atlanta? He pulled a sleek leather folder from his tailored jacket. Your documentary, he stated flatly. I watched it 3 times. It is authentic, and it possesses the kind of unapologetic grit that Hollywood has been trying to manufacture for a decade. You do not just capture stories, Maya, you dissect them. I want that exact vision for my next project. I took the folder he offered. Inside was a preliminary contract with numbers that made my previous distribution deal look like pocket change. I am offering you the lead director chair for a massive theatrical blockbuster, Elijah continued. We have a budget of $150 million. We have the A-list talent attached. We just need the right visionary to bring it to life. I want you to helm this picture. I looked at the contract, then back at the producer. What is the catch? I asked, knowing that men like him never flew across the country just to hand out blank checks. Elijah let out an appreciative laugh. You are smart, he noted. There is a specific creative condition. The script centers on generational wealth, community dynamics, and deep-rooted family betrayals. We cannot shoot this on a sterile soundstage in California. We need the real environment. I want to shoot the primary suburban scenes right here in your old neighborhood, the exact same affluent gated community where you grew up. I wanted to bring a massive Hollywood production right to the doorstep of the people who had spent my entire life trying to tear me down. It was poetic. It was the ultimate manifestation of Black excellence returning to conquer the very soil that once rejected it. I closed the leather folder and handed it to Tara, who stood right behind me with a massive grin. Draw up the final paperwork, Elijah. I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. We are going to make cinematic history together. 6 weeks later, my hometown was completely transformed. The quiet, affluent suburban street where Helen used to host her pretentious Sunday dinners was entirely locked down. Local police cars blocked both entrances to the neighborhood, protecting our closed set. Massive white production trailers lined the pristine sidewalks. Giant lighting rigs towered over the ancient oak trees, and catering trucks pumped the smell of fresh coffee into the morning air. Dozens of crew members rushed around carrying heavy equipment, wearing headsets. Right in the center of the street sat a black canvas chair with my name embroidered across the back in bold silver letters, Director. I sat in my chair wearing a headset and holding a heavy digital monitor. Across the street, behind strict velvet rope barricades and private security guards, stood the neighborhood gossips. Sister Beatrice and her country club friends were pressed against the ropes, craning their necks to get a look at the production. These were the women who had eagerly consumed Helen's toxic lies about my failures. Now they stood behind a barricade, begging my assistance for a chance to be background extras in my movie. I did not wave to them. I did not acknowledge their desperate attempts to get my attention. I simply called action and watched my multi-million-dollar vision come to life right on their manicured lawns. I was no longer the outcast daughter. I was the queen returning to her conquered kingdom. We spent the entire morning running complex tracking shots through the neighborhood, capturing the illusion of absolute suburban perfection. By early afternoon, we needed to relocate to a commercial area to capture gritty footage for a crucial transitional montage in the film. The location scouts had secured a dilapidated strip mall a few miles away. It was a stark, depressing contrast to the wealthy suburbs. It was a rundown concrete parking lot, backing up against a row of neglected discount stores, a failing pawn shop, and a cheap, dirty laundromat. Potholes littered the asphalt and weeds pushed through the cracked pavement. My production crew moved with military precision, setting up heavy camera cranes and laying down steel tracks for the dolly shot. I stood near the back of the commercial lot, framing the wide shot through my director viewfinder. The composition needed to highlight the sheer desperation of poverty, contrasting with the glittering illusion of wealth we had filmed earlier today. I scanned the gritty background, looking for the perfect visual angle. As I slowly panned the viewfinder past a row of overflowing industrial dumpsters, a solitary figure caught my eye. A woman was struggling to haul a massive leaking black trash bag over the edge of a rusted metal bin. She wore a baggy, shapeless gray janitorial uniform, stained with dark grease and foul dirt. Her hair, which used to be perfectly dyed every single week, was now tied back in a messy, frizzy knot. She looked incredibly exhausted, her thin shoulders slumped under the heavy physical labor. She dropped the garbage bag and leaned heavily against the grimy brick wall, wiping sweat from her forehead with her gloved hand. She looked utterly defeated, entirely broken by the cruel reality of minimum wage survival. I slowly adjusted the focus ring on my heavy camera lens, zooming in tight on her dirt-streaked face. My breath caught sharply in my throat. The tired, desperate woman cleaning the garbage in a neglected parking lot was Helen. The studio notification glowed on my phone. The Cannes Film Festival, the most prestigious cinematic event on the global stage, had officially requested my documentary for a prime nomination slot. I locked it and walked away from the grimy parking lot where Helen was left holding her trash bag. I did not look back. My focus shifted entirely to the future. The next 3 weeks became an absolute whirlwind of unapologetic luxury and relentless media preparation. I was no longer the struggling artist begging for scraps of validation at a Sunday dinner table. I was an internationally recognized director, and the studio made sure I was treated like royalty. My days transformed into a glamorous montage of high fashion and international press junkets. I stood on a circular pedestal in a private VIP fitting room on Rodeo Drive, surrounded by top-tier stylists. They draped me in custom haute couture gowns, pinning shimmering emerald silk and hand-stitched diamonds against my skin. I did interview after interview with European and American press outlets, confidently answering questions about my creative vision, while photographers snapped endless rolls of film. I was building a brand, an empire of black excellence that nobody could ever diminish or steal. But I was not going to the French Riviera alone. I drove my sleek new sports car to the Jacksons' house, holding a glossy embossed envelope. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson invited me inside, offering me sweet tea and warm smiles, just like they had done when I was a terrified teenager. I handed them the envelope and watched as Mr. Jackson carefully broke the seal. He pulled out 2 round-trip first-class tickets to Nice, France, along with a confirmed reservation for a luxury presidential suite overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. Mrs. Jackson gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "Maya," she whispered, shaking her head. "We cannot accept this. This is too much money." I placed my hands over hers, gently squeezing. "You paid for my first camera. When my own mother told me my dreams were garbage, I said, my voice steady and full of love. You fed me when I had nothing. You are my real family, and my real family flies first class. Pack your bags because we are going to Cannes." While I was sipping vintage champagne in a reclining leather seat somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, my biological sister was experiencing a vastly different reality. Chloe sat on a cold metal bench inside the chaotic, deafening recreation room of the Federal Correctional Institution. She wore a baggy, faded orange jumpsuit that completely washed out her complexion. The harsh, flickering fluorescent lights above buzzed loudly, casting an ugly yellow glare over the dozens of inmates playing cards and shouting over each other. There was no air conditioning. The room smelled of stale sweat and institutional bleach. Chloe hugged her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her acrylic nails had long since snapped off, leaving her hands looking ragged and neglected. The woman who once demanded $100,000 salaries just to save face was now trading instant noodles for extra phone minutes. Mounted high on the cinder block wall was a cheap flat-screen television protected by a thick plexiglass cage. It was tuned to a mainstream entertainment news channel. Chloe glanced up just as the broadcast cut to a breaking segment. The bright graphics flashed across the screen announcing the upcoming Cannes Film Festival. And then my face filled the monitor. The footage showed me stepping out of a black town car in Paris, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a pristine tailored suit. The entertainment anchor gushed over my rapid rise to fame, calling my documentary a brilliant masterpiece that exposed the dark underbelly of financial abuse. Chloe stared at the screen, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She watched me smile at the cameras surrounded by security and adoring fans. She watched the Jacksons walking proudly right behind me, treated like absolute VIPs. Bitter, resentful tears pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes. She had thrown away her freedom for a fake millionaire and a mother who used her as a prop. Now she was trapped in a concrete cage, watching the sister she had relentlessly bullied conquer the entire world. A burly inmate bumped roughly into Chloe, shoulder spilling lukewarm water on her orange uniform. Chloe did not even dare to complain. She just sat there drowning in the toxic acid of her own massive regret. The Mediterranean breeze was warm and fragrant as I stepped into the Grand Press Pavilion in Cannes. The room was packed with hundreds of international journalists holding microphones and digital recorders. The flashbulbs created a continuous blinding strobe effect as I took my seat at the center of the panel table. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson sat in the front row of the audience, beaming with immense pride. The studio executives flanked me, projecting absolute confidence. We opened the floor to questions and hands shot up instantly across the room. A prominent journalist from a major American publication stood up holding a notepad. "Maya," he said, his voice projecting clearly over the murmur of the crowd. "Your documentary has resonated with millions of people globally because of its raw, unapologetic look at betrayal and survival. You have achieved monumental success in record time. Tell us, who is your biggest inspiration for this achievement?" The entire room went completely silent, waiting for my answer. They expected a generic Hollywood response. I looked directly into the primary camera broadcasting this press conference live across the globe. I knew Helen, Marcus, and Chloe would eventually see this footage. I smiled, resting my hands on the table. "I dedicate this glory to the Jackson family," I said, my voice ringing with crystal-clear finality. "They are the people who lifted me up when those sharing my blood pushed me off a cliff into the abyss." 24 hours later, the grand ballroom of the county municipal building was packed wall to wall with the city elite. The federal marshals had organized a high-profile public auction for the crown jewel of Uncle Marcus' corrupt empire. The mega mansion was a sprawling 20,000-square-foot architectural monstrosity built entirely on the backs of stolen congregation tithes and embezzled scholarship funds. It sat on 10 acres of prime real estate, boasting indoor pools, a private movie theater, and a gold-leafed driveway. To Marcus and Vivian, that mansion was not just a home. It was the ultimate physical manifestation of their fraudulent supremacy over the Black community. I stood quietly in the very back of the auction room, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, hidden behind a group of aggressive real estate developers. Near the front row, wrapped in oversized trench coats and cheap sunglasses, Vivian and Marcus huddled together like desperate refugees. They had sneaked into the public gallery hoping a miracle would save them. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were praying that one of their former wealthy country club friends, or a sympathetic church deacon, would purchase the estate and quietly allow them to live in the guest house. They clung to the delusion that their elite status meant someone in this room still respected them enough to offer a bailout. The federal auctioneer stepped up, adjusting his microphone. The room fell silent. "We are starting the bidding for the foreclosed property at $6 million. The auctioneer announced, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. A wealthy developer from Atlanta raised his paddle immediately. "6.5, he called out. A tech CEO countered, $7 million. Vivian squeezed Marcus' arm, her eyes darting frantically around the room, waiting for her imaginary savior to step forward. She locked eyes with a former church board member sitting near the aisle, silently pleading with him to raise his paddle. The man simply looked away, completely ignoring her. Before the developer could raise his bid to 8, a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the heavy air. $15 million, the voice stated. Cash, payable immediately upon the strike of the gavel. The entire ballroom gasped, whipping their heads around to see who had just effectively shut down the entire auction in less than 60 seconds. It was my proxy. A sharp, incredibly ruthless corporate attorney I had flown in from Chicago specifically for this exact moment. He stood tall in the middle of the room, holding his paddle high, his expression completely blank. The auctioneer blinked, stunned by the massive preemptive cash offer. 15 million cash, he repeated, looking around the room. Do I hear 16? The developer lowered his paddle, shaking his head. The tech CEO crossed his arms and sat down. No one was going to fight a $15 million liquid cash offer for a foreclosed property. Going once, the auctioneer called out. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the center for $15 million. Vivian let out a sharp, devastated wail. She slumped against Marcus, who was staring blankly at the auctioneer, his jaw hanging open. Their final hope was entirely dead. A faceless corporate entity had just swallowed their holy fortress. The auctioneer pointed to my proxy. Sir, please approach the clerk to sign the deed transfer and finalize the financial routing. Under what name should the property be registered? My proxy stepped forward, straightening his tie. The property will be registered directly under the name of my primary client, he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. She is here to claim the deed personally right now. I stepped out from the deep shadows of the back row. The sharp click of my heels against the polished floor parted the elite crowd like the Red Sea. I walked down the center aisle, keeping my posture straight, eyes locked on the people who tortured me for decades. Vivian froze. The breath completely left her lungs. Marcus grabbed the edge of the wooden pew, his knuckles turning stark white as he stared at me in sheer, unadulterated horror. I walked right past them, stepping up to the clerk's desk. I picked up the heavy gold pen and signed my name on the federal deed transfer, officially taking legal possession of the 20,000-square-foot estate. The ultimate symbol of their greed, their status, and their fake religious superiority was now legally owned by the daughter they deemed a ghetto failure. I turned, holding the deed. Vivian was hyperventilating. She pulled down her sunglasses, eyes wide with a terror far beyond bankruptcy. I had not just taken her money. I had taken her sanctuary. You cannot do this. Maya. Vivian choked out, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. That is our home. That is our family legacy. You cannot just buy it to spite us. You do not even want to live there. You are right, I said, stepping right up to her, invading her space, until she was forced to lean back against the hard wooden pew. I would never live in a house built on stolen scholarship money and ruined lives. I just bought it because I can. Marcus shook his head, tears of absolute defeat welling in his eyes. You are a monster. You have stripped us of everything. I leaned in close to Vivian, my face just inches from hers. I let the silence hang between us for a terrifying second. I told you I would cancel my direct deposits, I whispered, my voice dripping with lethal satisfaction. I pulled my cell phone from my blazer pocket and tapped a single number on my speed dial. Tear it down, I ordered into the phone, making sure Vivian and Marcus heard every single word clearly. Send the bulldozers right now. I want the gates smashed, the marble pillars crushed, and the entire mansion completely gutted to the foundation today. The blinding flashbulbs of the paparazzi transformed the French evening into a chaotic symphony of light. Stepping out of the sleek black town car onto the iconic Promenade de la Croisette felt like stepping onto a different planet. The air was thick with the scent of sea salt and expensive perfume. I stood at the base of the massive red steps of the Palais des Festivals. My custom emerald silk gown flowed around me, catching every flicker of the camera flashes. This was the ultimate manifestation of black excellence. A girl who had been repeatedly told she was a worthless stain on her family was now commanding the absolute center of the global cinematic stage. I walked the red carpet with my head held high, projecting a quiet, undeniable power. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson walked right beside me, looking like royalty. Mrs. Jackson wore a stunning silver dress that made her glow, and Mr. Jackson wore a sharp, tailored tuxedo that commanded respect. We moved as a united front. The studio executives flanked us. Answering, every photographer captured the magnitude of this triumph. This was a victory for every scapegoat who had ever been thrown away. The heavy theater doors closed, sealing us inside the massive auditorium. 2,000 people fell silent as the lights dimmed and the screen flared to life. For the next 2 hours, I sat in the darkness, holding Mrs. Jackson's hand, while my soul was bared to the world. The documentary resonated. It cut through the silence with raw, unapologetic truth, exposing the dark mechanics of financial abuse, the weight of toxic narcissists, and the devastating reality of family betrayal. I could hear quiet gasps from the audience during the most intense reveals. I could feel the collective tension, the shared outrage, and the undeniable empathy building in the room. When the final frame faded to black, the screen held the dedication title card, honoring the Jackson family. For a split second, there was total, absolute silence. Then the entire auditorium erupted. 2,000 people rose to their feet in unison. The applause was deafening, a physical wave of sound that shook the velvet seats. The standing ovation lasted for 10 agonizingly beautiful minutes. Distinguished filmmakers, critics, and celebrities turned toward my seating box, clapping furiously with tears in their eyes. The studio executives were cheering, pumping their fists in the air. I looked over at Mr. and Mrs. Jackson. They were both weeping openly, wrapped in a tight embrace. The emotional dam inside me finally broke. Tears streamed down my face, ruining my flawless makeup. But I did not care. These were not the bitter, desperate tears I used to cry in my cramped childhood bedroom. These were tears of absolute freedom. They were tears of validation, closure, and ultimate victory. I had taken the ugliest, most painful parts of my existence and transformed them into a global masterpiece. I was no longer a victim, was a conqueror. The studio hosted a lavish after-party on a massive yacht anchored in the harbor, but I only stayed long enough to fulfill my contractual press obligations. The exhaustion of the day, combined with the monumental emotional release, left me craving solitude. I kissed the Jacksons goodnight, leaving them to enjoy the VIP treatment with the studio heads, and took a private car back to my luxury hotel. My presidential suite sat on the top floor, overlooking the glittering coastline of the French Riviera. I kicked off my designer heels and walked barefoot across the plush carpet toward the expansive glass balcony. The cool Mediterranean breeze brushed against my face. The yacht party was visible in the distance, a glowing beacon of my new reality. I poured a glass of sparkling water and leaned against the railing, breathing in the sweet taste of undisputed success. Everything was perfectly silent, perfectly aligned. Then the harsh vibration of my cell phone shattered the tranquility. It buzzed violently against the marble coffee table behind me. I turned around, my brow furrowing. Only a handful of people had this private international number. My production team knew I was resting. The Jacksons were busy celebrating. I walked back into the living area and picked up the device. The screen displayed a text message from an unsaved domestic number. I did not recognize the digits, but the area code belonged to Atlanta. I tapped the screen to open the notification. The message was short, desperate, and dripping with pathetic vulnerability. I am watching the news on the television in the community room. I saw you on the red carpet. You look so beautiful. Maya, I am so sorry for everything I did and everything I failed to do. I was a coward. I am so proud of you. Please just let me hear your voice one more time. Love, Dad. Marcus, the man who sat in his recliner while Helen verbally destroyed me. The man who let his white son-in-law steal my college fund for a fake luxury wedding. Now a convicted felon sitting in a halfway house or a cheap motel, watching his discarded daughter conquer the world on a grainy television screen. He wanted absolution. He wanted the easy grace that society always expects daughters to blindly hand over to toxic fathers. He wanted to feel like he had some small part in this massive triumph. I stared at the glowing letters on the screen, feeling absolutely nothing. The little girl who would have begged for that text message had died a long time ago. The woman holding the phone was forged in the fire. He refused to pull her out of. I did not demand an explanation or hurl insults. I simply tapped the information icon at the top of the screen. I hit delete, wiping his pathetic apology from my device. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I tapped the block number option, permanently severing his access to my life. There would be no easy forgiveness. The profound lesson from this journey is that true family is determined by unconditional support and not biological ties. For years, Maya endured the role of scapegoat while being belittled by parents who prioritized social status and a manipulative golden child over her mental health. However, she proved that your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. When biological relatives abandoned her for superficial luxury, she chose to honor the chosen family who genuinely nurtured her dreams. This story teaches us the vital importance of financial independence and unwavering boundaries. Maya shattered the toxic expectation that successful individuals must rescue abusive relatives from their own reckless choices. Instead of seeking revenge through anger, she achieved the sweetest retribution through massive, undeniable success. She took the trauma inflicted upon her and transformed it into a global empire, ultimately using her wealth to uplift her community rather than enabling bad behavior. If you are currently trapped in a family dynamic that constantly diminishes your light, please remember that walking away is never a failure. It is simply your ultimate liberation. Have you ever had to cut ties to protect your peace? Share your personal story with us below.